Online, everything gets blamed on cortisol. In real medicine, it's rarely that simple. If you spend any time on health content online, you've probably noticed the pattern. A puffy face gets labeled cortisol face. Belly fat becomes stress fat. Feeling tired, wired at night. Breaking out as an adult. Somehow all of it gets traced back to one hormone. And the message underneath is always the same. Something is wrong with your cortisol. And you can see it written all over your body. That story feels convincing because it gives people a single explanation for a very messy experience. Life feels harder. Your body feels different. And cortisol becomes a neat villain you can point to. But biology doesn't organize itself around clean narratives. And real medicine almost never works by blaming one hormone in isolation. The first thing to understand is that cortisol is not a mistake. It's not something your body produces when it's failing. Cortisol is essential for survival. It helps you wake up in the morning. It helps regulate blood sugar so your brain has fuel. It helps you respond to challenges, both physical and psychological. Without cortisol, basic life functions start to break down. So when people talk about cortisol as if it's always harmful, that's already a misunderstanding. What actually matters with cortisol is not whether it exists, but how it behaves over time. In a healthy system, cortisol follows a daily rhythm. It rises in the morning to support alertness and energy. It gradually falls as the day goes on, allowing your body to shift toward rest, repair, and sleep. That rhythm is far more important than the idea of cortisol being simply high or low. Everyday stress does activate cortisol. That's normal. Deadlines, poor sleep, emotional strain, illness. These all nudge the stress system. But activation is not the same thing as pathology. Most people living stressful lives are still operating within normal physiological ranges, even if they feel exhausted or overwhelmed. Feeling bad does not automatically mean something is hormonally broken. Where online narratives go off track is when they blur the line between normal stress physiology and medical conditions involving sustained cortisol excess. In clinical medicine, the dramatic visible changes people often point to, things like pronounced fat redistribution, significant muscle wasting, very fragile skin, or severe metabolic shifts, are discussed in the context of specific endocrine disorders. They are not the expected outcome of modern life stress, long work hours, or a rough season of sleep. That distinction matters, because when everything gets blamed on cortisol, people start interpreting normal human signals as medical warnings. A tired face after weeks of poor sleep becomes a hormone diagnosis. A shift in body composition after lifestyle changes becomes a biochemical failure. Medicine doesn't work that way. It doesn't diagnose hormones by looking in the mirror. And it doesn't reduce complex systems to single causes. Stress affects the body, but usually in indirect, layered ways. Stress can disrupt sleep. Poor sleep alters appetite, recovery, and mood. Changes in routine affect movement, food timing, and light exposure. Over time, those factors can absolutely change how you feel in your body. None of that requires cortisol to be chronically elevated or out of control. It's a systems problem, not a hormone villain story. Another issue with the visible signs framing is that it trains people to focus on appearance instead of patterns. Medicine looks at duration, progression, and context. How long has something been happening? What changed before it started? Is it stable, improving, or worsening? Are multiple systems involved, or just one? Those questions matter far more than whether something looks different in the mirror. So before we talk about the specific changes people often associate with cortisol, we need to reset the conversation. Seeing changes in your body does not mean you have a hormone disorder. At the same time, it doesn't mean your body is fine or that stress has no impact. What it usually means is that recovery has fallen behind demand. Sleep, rest, and regulation haven't kept up with what life is asking. In the next part, we'll go through the body changes most commonly blamed on cortisol and separate three things very clearly: what medicine actually recognizes, what's associated but non-specific, and what only applies in medical contexts, not to diagnose yourself, but to understand what's normal, what's not, and where fear-based health content gets it wrong. Now let's talk about the changes people most often blame on cortisol, and what medicine actually says about them. One of the most common claims you'll hear is facial puffiness, or a rounder face. Online, this gets labeled as cortisol face. In real medicine, a visibly rounded face tied directly to cortisol is discussed mainly in the context of long-standing endocrine disorders, not everyday stress. Normal life stress does not reliably raise cortisol high enough or long enough to cause dramatic facial fat redistribution. What most people are noticing instead is fluid shifts, sleep debt, inflammation, or weight changes that have multiple inputs, not a single hormone switch. Another big one is belly fat. Cortisol does play a role in how the body manages energy under stress, but it's not acting alone. Sleep duration, eating patterns, activity level, and circadian rhythm all influence where weight shows up. When medicine talks about cortisol-driven central fat accumulation, it's usually describing a medical pattern seen over time, not a few stressful months. Correlation does not equal causation, and seeing weight change around the abdomen does not tell you what your cortisol levels are. Skin changes come up constantly too. Acne, oiliness, or dull-looking skin. Cortisol can influence inflammation, but adult skin changes are among the least specific signals in medicine. Hormones, skincare routines, diet, gut health, medications, and genetics all play roles here. That's why clinicians don't treat acne or oily skin as evidence of cortisol problems. It's a common effect with many possible explanations. You'll also hear about muscle loss, thin arms or legs paired with a fuller midsection. Again, in textbooks, true cortisol-driven muscle wasting is associated with prolonged pathological hormone exposure. For most people, changes in muscle tone are far more often explained by reduced activity, poor sleep, under-recovery, or aging-related shifts in training response. Stress can contribute indirectly, but it's not acting like a demolition crew on your muscles by itself. Hair thinning is another area where nuance matters. Diffuse shedding can happen after stress, illness, or major life disruption, but that doesn't mean cortisol is chronically elevated. Hair growth cycles are sensitive to many systemic changes, and shedding is often delayed, showing up months after the trigger. That timing alone makes it unreliable as a hormone signal. Some of the more dramatic signs people mention: easy bruising, very thin skin, purple stretch marks, slow wound healing are real medical findings. But here's the critical distinction. These are discussed in medicine as red flags for specific disorders, not as subtle lifestyle clues. They are not expected outcomes of normal stress physiology, and they are never diagnosed based on appearance alone. So what's the takeaway? Cortisol isn't the villain, it's a messenger. When life stays demanding and recovery stays low, the body shifts priorities. Sleep gets lighter, energy feels inconsistent, cravings change. Training feels harder. Over time, those shifts can affect how you look and feel. But that doesn't mean your hormones are broken. It means your system has been in demand mode for too long. This is why medicine doesn't start with the mirror. It starts with patterns. How long has this been going on? What changed first? Sleep, workload, schedule, illness. Are there multiple systems affected or just one? And most importantly, is this within the range of normal human stress responses? Or does it cross into something that needs medical evaluation? Understanding that difference matters. It keeps people from panicking over normal stress signals. And it also helps real medical problems get taken seriously instead of being diluted into internet buzzwords. At the end of the day, noticing changes in your body isn't a diagnosis. It's information. And the most productive response isn't fear or blame. It's restoring recovery where you can: consistent sleep timing, daylight exposure, regular movement, and periods where your nervous system actually gets to stand down. Those are the foundations medicine looks at long before it points the finger at a hormone. If you want to go deeper, the research behind this is linked below. And if you're noticing patterns that feel persistent or extreme, that's a conversation for a clinician, not a comment section.